Johan Liebert from Monster, the anime. He's an interesting character. Very evil, some would say. Or is he? Well, me personally, I think he's actually not that evil. Or he's not a true monster, to say the least. Now, what do I mean by true monster? Well, whenever I say true monster, I mean like you are pure to the core evil. You have all evil inside of your body and all this hatred, and this is what you live for. This is who you are as an individual. Again, considering Johan and his background in life, like from childhood to what he is now around the age of 19 to 20, I don't think he's really that evil of a person, considering that when he was a child, he went to a eugenics lab. He was taken by some Nazi scientist. It was like, yes, we must do experiments on you, and with a better German accent than that, of course. And so they do all these experiments. They try to make him the perfect soldier, the perfect human being, some would say, right? And he's taken through many different orphanages and many different labs. One prominent one in the story being 511 Kinderheim, right? Where essentially it's like PUBG Mobile. It's a living hell. It's a literal hell war zone area, right? Considering all these things like building up, you must think like, okay, yeah, that's pretty fucked up, But that doesn't really explain fully, how he became this monster, this menace. Some would say, okay, that I don't think that's an appropriate term to describe him. A man who's literally murdered good amount of people throughout the anime, like innocent people, mind you. He goes on these killing sprees and such, and you could say, oh, it's because of the 501 Kinderheim or the eugenics labs and all that stuff, or you can also say it's because of the book he's read, which me personally, I disagree. I think that ties in more to some of his more like developmental, like psychology sort of aspects, which I'll get into that later. But throughout my arguments here and what I'm about to present to you right now, I just want you to have this understanding that that book shows a lot about his personality and really just how much of just an innocent boy he really is, actually. So, but enough of that, let's get straight to the articles. Okay, this one article that I found, which is a review article, it's titled Chronic Stress in Adolescence and Its Neurobiological and Psychopathological Consequences, and RDOC perspective, which I did check what RDOC is, so you can find it in the article if you're interested. So, but yeah, in this article, they defined adolescence from the ages of 10 through 19, right? And that's sort of the definition we're going to be going through this, and presuming that, like, Johan sort of fits in this sort of description where typically the definition is from teen to young adult anyways, so we're sticking to that. Throughout childhood development and throughout adolescent development up till the age of, some studies have said 25, others say 21, many other different ages, but for my theory, I'm saying 25, right? So from what I've really gathered from this article, there's like a lot of things to gather. One of the most dynamic regions for adolescence being the prefrontal cortex, which what I mean by that is this is the region where there's the most amount of development and most of the like changes that really happen depending on life events and how the brain really gets to grow in certain environments and all this sort of stuff. And for those that don't know what the prefrontal cortex does, it's basically the area of logic. This is where all your logistical thinking, your critical thinking skills come into play, like around here. This is where it is. Fun fact. Not to get confused with knowledge or intellect, that would be more associated with the hippocampus, which that's also associated with another network that we're going to touch on later in this video, so stay tuned. Right? Understanding that leads us to this other piece of information where from adolescents that deal with chronic stress, we see smaller volumes of the prefrontal cortex and the orbital frontal cortex, which is another like supporting area in the prefrontal cortex, one subsection of it. And from there, you see a lot of different developmental changes, and there's many other different things that happen. Well, I'm spitting bullshit again. There are changes to neuroplasticity, which is how your brain sort of develops and how your neurons or your brain cells, they start to develop in different ways, and how it's like your brain learning itself, right? Those changes happen with high amounts of cortisol or high amounts of stress, considering that in this article they say that high glucocorticoid receptor expression affects the development of plasticity and gene expression, which we do see a higher amount of glucocorticoid receptor expression when there's higher amounts of stress and cortisol levels that go onto the brain, because it's just hyperactivity, basically. And there's like a lot of other things I can get into with like the sympathetic and the parasympathetic system, where your sympathetic is sort of like your survival mode, which allows like a lot of activation of different things and a lot of things to occur in your body, like expansion or like higher heart rate or expansion of your lungs, all these different things going on, but that's not really too important. What I'm trying to get here exactly is that your brain is just going nuts. It's firing like bam, 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 right? And it's gonna keep on going bam, 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 bam when you're heavily stressed out, especially when you're a kid, because a lot of kids usually are very hyperactive, and for the reason being is because of that whole neuroplasticity and the whole activation of neurons, because it's sort of their brains sort of trying to learn what's going on in the environment. With Johan, we see this a lot where, like, of course he's just a innocent little boy, but he's also a curious boy too. He's one who is involved with like all these different things and whatnot, and I believe he's also studied a decent bit when I was a kid, but I could be wrong about that. It's been a long time since I've seen the anime, so sorry if I'm wrong. I also did the research on the anime itself. I just did research on just paper research. That's it. So -1 for me. But either way, we can say, or at least I could say with confidence that, well, some confidence at least, that that Johan is a pretty curious boy, somewhat intellectual too, considering that he has all these like high stats and all these great stuff, and that's why they want to take him to eugenics lab. So I mean, yeah, those aspects can take into play there. Understanding all that, yeah, of course, his brain is gonna go keep on firing like bam, 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 and take it to a traumatic situation, or like in this unknown environment where he basically just got kidnapped essentially. Well then, yeah, of course his brain is going to develop a bit more differently from there, and then it's going to start to just go all over the place, and mainly with negative thoughts, right? And so that leads on to another point, which is anhedonia, basically. And what anhedonia is the lack of pleasure, or the lack of feeling pleased or happiness, or that sort of stuff. This paper goes on to talk about the fact of just how anhedonia is prevalent and is developed throughout adolescence with high chronic stress levels, and how it could even lead to emotionless behavior for the most part, right? Which would support the fact of Johan. When we see him throughout the anime, you don't see him smile a whole lot, or when you do, it's like a mild smile, maybe, right? Or just like a cunning smile, or just a smile to present, not a smile of joy, or not a smile of I'm having the best time of my life, because like you don't really see him in the anime actually triumphant, like feeling so good about killing someone. Maybe like a little laughter too, but I don't really think that's laughter of pleasure. I think that's more of a laughter of like, okay, I feel safer now. I'm comforting myself. I'm laughing because I'm scared. And to go on like a little personal note, right, or just my personal experiences, this isn't related to the paper, but there have been moments where I have been stressed, and there have been moments, as everyone has done, right? But like whenever my coping mechanism of stress is through laughter, right? Or just laughing it off, or just saying like dark, edgy jokes, And for some people, some would say, "Man, you're fucked up. You have a weird mindset, man." And I'm like, "No, I'm just trying to cope." And I didn't really realize or understand this too well up until like reading a couple papers here and there. Not this one specifically, but just a couple papers, and just sort of taking the time to think for myself. It's like, oh wait. This is a coping mechanism, and I've seen other people have this coping mechanism too, so I'm not the only one, or at least I don't think I am. but either way, that's personal note aside, laughing can be a coping mechanism. I can't prove this scientifically yet. I'm sure there are plenty of articles that would go on about how laughter is a coping mechanism through stress, and how that, like, many different ways to cope through stress, really. But as of this current moment, I can't really prove it to you scientifically. That all being said, though, right, we do see that Johan isn't really the most pleased or very happy individual, and I mean rightfully so, considering, yeah, he's pretty traumatized. So there's all that stuff, and then from this point on, we gotta take a look at the cortical limbic network, which I know, a very fancy name, right? But the cortical limbic network is comprised of the amygdala, the hippocampus, And I believe the prefrontal cortex. Okay, I'll repeat that one more time. The cortical limbic cortex or cortical limbic network is consistent of the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the prefrontal cortex, right? And you might be wondering, why am I heavily emphasizing this? Well, I already explained about the prefrontal cortex and about like how that the volume of that is significantly, well, not significantly, but like it's decreased to an extent. And therefore the whole idea of logic is kind of thrown out the window, right? Or at least the normal amount of logic that we as humans would possess, right? So we already explained that part. But then there's the amygdala and hippocampus, which I briefly talked about the hippocampus being like this sort of information library or like this information hub. Or if I haven't, I just did now. So there's that. And so understand that that's the hippocampus. And then also the amygdala is your main area in your brain where it's associated with fear and being scared and all this sort of stuff. Also for sexual arousal. Fun facts. But yeah. So now that we understand these three things, how has that really affected Johan's brain? Well, rather, this is all just presumptions because, again, we can't really just cut open Johan's brain and just sort of observe his brain or, like, take a look into him and do these experiments, of course. We can't do that because he's not real. But we can, however, make some predictions and understand, like, okay, well, maybe this is what happened to his brain, you know? What we know about the cortical limbic, or at least the important takeaways from it, is that this is involved in decision making and emotional regulation, amongst other things, but mainly decision making and emotional regulation, right? And remember how in the beginning or throughout this talk I mentioned that there's like a high like growing up as a child, right? Your head just fires a lot. There's like a lot of fire, like boom, 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 right? And because of that, that leads to neuron plasticity and gene expression and development of the brain and all this sort of stuff, right? I mentioned that? Yeah. That gets a bit fucked. And you start to have that sort of like hyperactivity and, well, when stress comes into play, when cortisol levels kick up, right? This affects a lot of different things. And one of those things being sort of synaptic transmission, or rather how these brain cells communicate with other brain cells, right? The cortical limbic network for us would allow us to regulate our emotions and be able to be like, okay, maybe I shouldn't laugh at some guy's funeral because that's considered rude and unethical. Or maybe I shouldn't burn a gas station because I think it's funny. I don't think that's a really funny thing to do. You know, that's pretty cringe or some shit like that, right? Like, as normal people, we can accept this. But for some psychopath or someone like Johan, right? You know, he might think, oh, yes, arson seems like a pretty normal thing to do. I'm going to go into a library and I'm just going to burn it down because I feel like that's the most appropriate thing to do to cope with my stress. And also, there's this book that I don't like, and I'm going to burn it down along with everyone else here because I am a man. And also, they don't want people to find out as a did or something like that. A lot of crazy stuff happening. But so, the high amount of cortisols would affect that sort of connection and the network in general, and therefore would alter, you know, emotional regulation and decision making, especially when it comes to the prefrontal cortex being your decision making area, right? And so some of the symptoms or some of the behavioral observations made from these sort of changes is that you'll see some adolescents acting a lot more mature for their age is one thing, or they will have a lot more, they'll be a lot more pessimistic, or they have like negative emotional thinking, and one key thing here is altered moral decision making, right? That's a big one because Johan doesn't really have good moral decision making, right? We can all agree on that because, again, I don't think it's ethical to go into a library and burn it down when it's a new showcasing of the library just because, oh, book? I don't like that book. And I want to kill, haha, right? Like, none of those things are pretty normal. And I think we can all agree that as humans. And you know, there's a lot more to go on with this article, but I don't think I think I've said enough already, and also I don't want to bore you guys with more neuroscience and psychology stuff. So, and there's also another article I found, which I found to be pretty interesting, leading to sort of the development of being a psychopathy, or rather just the inducement of psychopathy. But I'm not gonna go into that because that's more into just like technical nitty gritty stuff going on there, right? But I just spouted a bunch of information to you, and probably you haven't picked up half of it, which is totally okay because this is a lot of information. And I'll even show you my notes. If I can turn around, that's my there we go. Yeah, see, this is a lot. This is a lot, right? I don't know if you can see this, but yeah, it's a decent amount of stuff. I shortened it down a bit just to try to like get the key points going, but it's a lot. And it's totally fine if you did catch up with it. But we're not here to talk about how much information there is. We're here to answer the question, is Johan a true monster? And the answer, from me at least, no. I think he's just completely traumatized. He's still an innocent boy at heart. And just an innocent boy in general, really. Like, he doesn't have the emotional maturity. He has the intellect, sure. But that doesn't necessarily correlate with emotional maturity, which a lot of people get this misconception of. Which I don't blame them, because usually highly intellectual people are considered to be more emotionally mature just because of the fact of like, oh, they have the patience and the will to gather all this knowledge, so I'm sure they must be intellectual. But I mean, that's not true, considering that there are kid geniuses that are narcissistic as well because of their parents are like outside influence. So that's that to be said. But I really don't think that it's also his fault for becoming the monster that he's become, considering the fact that the book, right? I haven't mentioned too much about the book, which shame on me for, but the book does come into play, considering the fact that when we see the story of the book really talks about like, oh, well, he's this like happy prince, he's this wonderful, loving, everybody loves him, he's this beautiful, smart prince, whatever, right? But then all of a sudden he gets cursed and becomes a monster. And in order to not die, basically, he has to eat other people. And he has to save himself from exploding and like being disintegrated or something. I don't know, something along those lines, right? Taking that all to account, and taking into account Johan's psychology and how emotional he gets when he reads that book. Well, first of all, we have to establish this, right? Johan has a deep connection with that book, considering that he grew up with that during childhood, and that it's very relatable to him, and that it brings back his traumatic past. And it realizes like, oh shit, I've become the monster. I must stop myself from trying to kill it, because like, he doesn't want to kill the people. He wants to just live like a happy, normal boy, right? And that's why you see him doing this pose too. That's why he wants to die, because he realizes, oh, I am this dangerous monster. I shouldn't be fit for society and whatnot. So I'd rather be dead so that I could save other people's lives, including my sister. I don't want her to be involved with this. Please kill me. And so he tries to share this message, but because of a psychopathy, because of like the monster taking over him, he can't really communicate that message out to Dr. Tenma and like other people who are trying to hunt him down. And many other people get different messages from him because of how psychopathic he is and how much intellect and how much charisma he exuberates throughout all these individuals, right? And so it leads him to this sort of tight corner, in this like messed up situation where like, he's trying to escape out of this whole monster mentality, and because of his neurology and how like fucked up his brain has become just because of the high amount of stress from childhood that he had no control over, mind you. Well, you can't really blame him for really killing all those people, right? Like, yes, it's a bad thing, but he's a boy at the end of the day. It's really not his fault, and he's not a true monster because of all this. From the story, we can tell again that like Johan has been killing all these different people just because of the whole idea of like, well, what is it? Sorry, I got to like, Johan is killing all these people for the whole sake of survival instinct, and just so that he can live. He can, that's his coping mechanism. That's what his brain is trying to tell him. It's like, you must cope through killing, because most likely that's what he's been taught in the eugenics labs. And again, this is a lot of like neuroscience kind of taking over, because this is probably going to lead back over to the sympathetic system, which I think I might have mentioned before, but just in case if I haven't, the sympathetic system is associated with cortisol and norepinephrine, aka adrenaline, right? And so, because of all this, heightened amount of cortisol levels, like for a long period of time, like chronic stress through long periods of time, can do many horrible things to your body. Many horrible things. One of them leading to mental disorders and leading to stuff like psychopathy, for example. Considering all that, he sort of has this like hardwired mentality. It's like, psychopath, 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 right? The way, like, his only way of living through life is I have to kill people. That is what I need to do to survive. Because, again, he has these heightened amount of cortisol levels, and because of his, like, internal system sort of being fucked and just sort of not being able to recognize, like, what is a stressful situation and what is not, he thinks he's in dire stress all the time. For the most part, this is my theory, again, right? I could be totally wrong about this, but for the most part, he thinks he's in dire stress. And also think about this, right? He kills certain innocent people that get in his way, and he kills a bunch of people just, you know, that he doesn't really have that much emotional connections with, okay? But he doesn't hunt Dr. Tenma. He doesn't kill him. He doesn't kill Nina. He doesn't kill, like, anybody else that's, like, associated with him. He doesn't go find his mom or nothing like that, even though he has some certain amount of reason to hunt down his mom and be like, how dare you for letting me go over to the eugenics lab? You led me to this life. How could you done this? You know, he could have done that, but he didn't. Why? He still has the sort of empathy in him. He still has the sort of humane side into him where he's still a boy and he still has a sort of like, basically, he doesn't need to do this because he understands that those people aren't really a threat for him. In a sense that they can comfort him, and they lead him to the sort of like a happy place into him, to an extent, right? And if we think about Dr. Tenma's situation, like Dr. Tenma with Johan, you know, Johan is very thankful for Dr. Tenma for saving his life, and has no reason to kill him, right? Despite the fact that Dr. Tenma is trying to kill Johan because of Johan killing other people. And so, this leads out to many other different theories, and many other, like, crazy things that happen in his mind, but really, all in all, though, he's still a young boy, and he's still just a traumatized boy who's trying to survive in this world. And if only there were good therapists in 60s or 70s? Shit. If only I knew what time this story took place, but if only there was a good therapist for him to help him out. And so yeah, that's my video essay on Johan. I'm not going to add like a little, how you can like benefit from this, because I mean, this is like a really weird niche sort of situation, especially since Johan in general is such a very interesting and unique character in terms of like the psychology, like very realistic character too, I would imagine. Like, he doesn't seem like overblown to proportions through certain aspects. He seems like pretty normal considering his circumstances, and like a pretty rational character for, again, all of his circumstances. And I think that's why he's a really fascinating character, and why on YouTube you'll find many different videos like this one, where it's talking about Johan's psychology and like how did Johan become the monster, why is he a monster, blah blah blah. But I hope, like, you know, leaving this video, you can kind of take away the fact of, well, one, understanding that Johan's not a terribly awful person. You have a better understanding of Johan and just psychology and neuroscience in general, which would be pretty cool. But also, I hope you could take away with this video somewhat that, you know, maybe if there's someone who's in dire stress and a dire need, and you might think like, oh, he's such an awful person, maybe he's actually not. Maybe he's just trying to live through life, and there's a lot of horrible things going on in this life, and he needs or he or she needs somebody to help him out. Maybe you could be that person to help him out. That's not for me to judge though. So that's the end of this video. Hope you guys liked it, and maybe I might make more monster videos. Maybe not. I don't know. Bye.